I'm Matt Hanlon. I'm a longtime software engineer. I'm a teacher. I'm a coach. You name it. And I'm here to walk you through a little bit more about Swift Playgrounds 4. So you probably know by now that you can build apps and ship them all the way to the App Store with Swift Playgrounds 4 on your iPad or on your Mac. And I'm going to walk you through that next step. When you get to the point where you've built this amazing app, maybe even shipped it to the App Store, what's the next step? I have to go from here to potentially adding some new features like iCloud that I can't build on Swift Playgrounds. So where do I go next? How do I get this over to my Mac? How do I start using Xcode and its more advanced debugging tools and add loads more capabilities to my app? Swift Playgrounds is an amazing place to start, but we do hit a certain ceiling at a certain point. So let's take a look. I'm going to start on Swift Playgrounds on the iPad. You can also do this on Playgrounds on the Mac, but we're going to start on the iPad because that's probably where you're starting from. In Swift Playgrounds, I'm going to create a new app by tapping on the app button down in the lower left-hand corner. And it's going to create a new app for me with a randomly selected icon with a tint color. And when I open that up, I have our usual view of our app preview. We've got our content view up on the screen. Now, we can get quite a ways with Swift Playgrounds in terms of building an app. There's lots of things we can do, and I'll show you a few examples in a bit. We can even do things like, if we go up here to the sidebar, we can open that up. We can use all sorts of code that other people have written for us by going to the Add File button, tapping on that, and saying, I want to add a Swift package. Now here it's asking for a package URL. So I happen to have one of those. There's a great set of resources, of course, on GitHub. Lots of code for us to borrow from. This here is a package that I built a while ago for some teachers where we wanted to show the apple pie game as a Swift package that we could import into any project we were building. So this sounds like something that would come in useful for my app. So I'm going to go to the code button here, and I'm going to choose to copy this URL. That's the package URL they're asking for. And if I tab back to my Swift Playgrounds app, I'm going to go paste that into my package URL. It's going to go off and fetch the versions for me and the available products in that package. And I'm going to say add to app playground. Now this is great. I can inspect the source here in the packages area. But I already know a bit about this package. So if it were a package I wasn't 100% familiar with, I would dig through those sources. But I know that there's a My Apple Pie module that I want to import, just like Swift UI. And as I start typing it, Swift Playgrounds helps me with autocomplete. Now we just imported apple pie. In fact, I'm going to bring back up the preview to see my changes immediately. I don't need to see that code anymore. And just beneath Hello World, this is where I'm going to actually import the game or add the game to my user interface by saying apple pie. Again, as I start typing, I get it in the autocomplete menu. So I'm going to hit the down arrow and hit return. So I've got a fully fledged apple pie game. This is the project from Developing Swift Fundamentals, the second unit. So after you've done all the fun auto layout stuff, but this is re-implemented in Swift UI. So if you want to take a look at this, I highly recommend going and checking out that app package URL on GitHub. You can always download the source, play around with it. This is a fully functioning game, so we can tap on the letters and it'll start to pick the successful letters there. And it'll also take apples off the tree when we guess a wrong letter. So I can actually get this app pretty far along. There's loads of stuff I can add to this. I can add video playback. I can add the vision framework and other machine learning pieces. But say I get to the point where I'm saving these games in files and I want them to sync up to iCloud. for the users. It's a pretty good experience. We're all used to having our different devices and having documents just seamlessly sync across the devices. So how do we make that next leap? Well, unfortunately, we can't just go to our capabilities here in my app settings. There are some options where we can add different capabilities, like we can add the ability to access the microphone. And loads of other things. But at a certain point, we may run up against the limitations of Swift Playgrounds. That's when we might want to either just edit this file in Xcode or potentially upgrade it to an Xcode project. So let me show you that progression. So first we'll open this project itself in Xcode on the Mac. And then the next thing we're going to do is going to be add all of this code to an Xcode project file and upgrade our app experience. If we keep the same bundle identifier, we can still push that up to App Store Connect and still push the same app to all of our users on the App Store. It's just coming from Xcode rather than Swift Playgrounds. So let's go take a look. So I'm going to close this down. I'm going to go back here and I'm going to share this project to my desktop. I can do that with AirDrop. So I'm going to go over to Select. I'm going to select my app copy. And I'm going to choose Share. And I'm just going to AirDrop that to myself. And I'll meet you over on the desktop. Okay, so we're back on the desktop. Here's my app copy 14 that I've just dropped over here. If I right click on this file and I choose Open With, I can open it with Xcode, with Playgrounds by default, but I can also choose to open it with Xcode. So if I do that, I'm going to get a message that says it's a package downloaded from the internet. Are we sure we want to open it? Yes, we do. And you can see, if you're familiar with Xcode, this might be right at home and familiar for you. I've got my Project Navigator over here where I can see all the files in my app, as well as the package dependencies. And that's things like my apple pie, that package that we downloaded from GitHub. Now, if I go over to my content view, I'm going to expand this a bit so that we can actually see what's going on. I'm going to unpause the preview. Now, even if you're coming from Swift Playgrounds and that's all you've used to build your apps, this should look pretty familiar. We have our code here. We have our sidebar view like we do in Swift Playgrounds. And we have our app preview pane. And we've got this extra inspector pane. I'm actually going to hide that by tapping on this button here. But this looks a lot like what we saw on the iPad. In fact, it plays the same. So now, if we want to make that next step, the way we edit our app properties is very similar to how we did it in the sidebar in Swift Playgrounds. We would go over to My App Copy. And here we can add things like signing in capabilities. We would add a development team here. I would go up to the capability button up above. It's a bit disconnected from this section over here, but it mentions add capabilities by clicking the plus button. So if I tap on that, this is where I get the same options that I had on the iPad with a bit of explanation about what the different capabilities are. So if you're looking for more debugging help, or you're looking for just the use of Xcode as a professional integrated development environment, I'm going to change the simulator from my phone over to, let's pick an iPad mini. I can press the run button. Let a few errors go by as it tries to build my project and figure the whole thing out. We can see the status of it here. And we wait for that to build, and we'll be able to use the full simulator. So just like a professional iOS developer, you're using the same tools that we use every day. I can use the simulator to simulate different ways the device might be held. Landscape, portrait. I can still play around with the features and see if it works. Here we go. Our first word was segues. So we get our fully featured app. We can also use things like the built-in debugger to Xcode. Now, if you want to get really sophisticated that way, I highly recommend going to check out Develop in Swift Fundamentals. The first unit has an excellent lesson called Building, Running, and Debugging an App that will teach you all about these things here. So when I tap on the line number gutter, it'll create a breakpoint so that when I launch my app, in fact, we'll hit the play button again, stop the app, rebuild it, and relaunch it in the simulator. We'll see that the app hasn't launched just yet on the iPad because it's jumped back to Xcode where I'm in the debugger. And there are lots of sophisticated things that we can do here, like step through our code. So it's a really handy tool for that bit more advanced debugging work. And it just gives you a bit more of a better picture of all the code in your project. So at this stage, we're still very much like we were in Swift Playgrounds. And in fact, we can still use this project if we keep it as a swiftpm in Swift Playgrounds on the iPad or on the Mac. It's the next step that we're going to make where we move to the Xcode project format, where we need to make that leap that's going to take us off the iPad permanently. And now we're going to be working with Xcode from here on out. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to hide the simulator. So if I do want to add a capability that the Swift Playgrounds app format just doesn't support, like iCloud, now I need to make a new project that's going to be Xcode based. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go create a new project. So I'll go up to New Project in Xcode. It offers you a few different options. You'll note here that I have iOS selected and App. I'm going to hit Next. We're going to call this one Apple Pie 2.0. I'll leave it as my team. I'm going to change the interface to Swift UI because that's what we're building with. And the language is Swift. And I'll hit Next. We'll save it in my projects folder here. The Git repository I like to keep because that's a way of keeping version control. That's another feature that you get with Xcode that you don't have in Swift Playgrounds, is there's a whole integrate menu that will tell you if you've got changes that maybe you're working on this file with someone else. It's a much more advanced development technique. So you'll see I have my two projects here now. This looks very similar because it gives us the same template out of the box with this hello world. Now, if I go back to the original one that's still running, in fact, I'm going to hit stop. Before I do, we can see how much CPU it's using, memory it's using, how much disk. We can use a lot of really sophisticated tools here to see how efficient our app is being. But what we're going to do is I'm going to go back to the Project Navigator. So you do that by clicking on this folder here. If this doesn't appear for you, you can always try looking for this button. And that will bring back up the Navigator pane. And we want to be in that first folder, which is the Project Navigator. So I don't have a lot of code here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag these over to my Xcode project. Now this is a new file. I'm going to leave copy items as needed, create groups, hit finish. And now I've caused a little bit of confusion because we have two different app files. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to delete this apple pie app file. I'm going to just move it to the trash. And then this one is my old one. And this is my one that references apple pie. So I'm going to actually delete this content view as well. The reason why I'm getting these little red X's and all these errors is because I've got a few files here that aren't compatible, that don't work well together. And in fact, if I try building this now, I'll use that same, I'll look for, I'll tell you what, we don't have it there immediately, so we'll go with the iPad 10 generation. I have an issue with no such module, my apple pie. Now I can add that by going up to add package dependencies, just like I did on the iPad. And in fact, I have it here in my list, but you can paste that same URL here into the search bar. I'm going to add the package. It goes just like Swift Playgrounds did, fetches the same information. I'm going to add that package. And right now you can see my files seem to have disappeared. This is what's going to happen frequently. This navigator has lots of different functions and we jump around between the different ones. So right now I'm in the Issue Navigator. This shows me any errors, any issues, warnings that aren't going to prevent me from running my app, but are things that I might want to address. I can always get back to the project navigator by either pressing on the folder or by hitting Command 1 will bring up the project navigator. Now I'm still getting an error here, and if I tap on it, this usually will help me out. That stop sign with the dot in the middle will usually offer me some way to fix the error. But you can see that it just took Xcode a few minutes to recognize that I had downloaded the package. It now knows that my apple pie is there. If I bring back up my preview, now in this case my preview's gone. So a handy way to get a preview in Swift UI is to go, Option, Preview, and then anything inside those brackets is what's going to get previewed over there. So I'm going to preview a content view. I need to create an instance of it. So once I do that, I might need to help it along the way by hitting the reload button. In fact, I may need to help it along even further by hitting the play button and building it. Now over here, I've had my 10th generation iPad launch. And there's my content view. This is using the same code that I had on my iPad. I just dragged those files in and then I deleted the ones that were created with the default template. And I can do the same thing. I can drag all my folders over, just make sure that check copy items is checked. And now we'll see when we go up to the top, this looks a little bit different than it did before when it was a Swift PM project file. So if I tap on that, we can see a lot more options for Xcode. We have things called targets and projects, and those are different things. We have app categories that we can assign, which we also can do in Swift Playgrounds. We can set a new display name. We can specify orientations that we support. It's much easier in this format, much easier to find how to enable an iPad only app, for instance. If I unchecked all of these, we're only going to support the iPad. It's a little bit more difficult. We have to edit the package file itself on our swiftpm files. So this might be another reason why you move to Xcode projects. We can enable other things like app intents and all sorts of other really, really cool features that we get for free with a lot of these frameworks from Apple that we just can't quite access from Swift Playgrounds. When I go to signing and capabilities, we have the same callout. We can add capabilities by clicking that plus button. And when we click here, now we see that there are a lot more options. We can implement ClassKit if we're building an app to be managed through the Classroom app, iCloud, in-app purchase, and loads more. So this is what we get with moving to moving to Xcode. When I add the iCloud capability, we have a few different choices. We could use the iCloud key value store for keeping some preferences in sync across systems. We could use iCloud documents. We could use CloudKit. So we can store databases in the cloud. If we start using sophisticated things like Swift Data, this will really help us make our app experience an amazing one for our users as their content syncs across all their devices logged into that same Apple ID. Now, in terms of this error here, cannot preview file, we may want to just look at the inspector. Sometimes this will tell us, if I go over here, if it's included in the right target. This one looks like it wasn't actually copied over, so we might want to actually copy that one over. When I tap on that little folder button, it opens up the Finder view on it. And I can also see that inside the swiftpm folder is a bunch of files. This is where our content view is. Our package resolve file, that's the one that fetched my apple pie down. Our package file that explains to your operating system how to run the app. And even the myapp.swift. So if I look at that, that's the one on the desktop. I may want to move that and fix that. That's my issue here with not building this file. So I could probably update that. Let's try to debug that while we're sitting here. If you're not interested at this stage, you don't have to go through the debugging. That's just one way to get your files over from a swiftpm project file, which is the Swift Playgrounds format, over to an Xcode project file, which is that .xcodeproj file format. So I'm going to close this. When we're done with this swiftpm project, I'm going to retire that because I don't want to keep coding on my iPad because I won't be able to sync changes off as seamlessly. I can still code in it. I just might need to airdrop the Swift files over and then either copy the contents in or copy the actual file in. But I'm going to close that project and I'm going to open this in the Finder. So I'm going to right click on the project file and say show in Finder. That's going to bring it up over here. And you can see Xcode Proj, I've got a folder with some files in it. There's the myapp file. And the reason why the content view file didn't come over is because there was already one here. If you remember, when I created this project, there was a content view and an apple pie 2.0.swift file that was the app file. So what I want to do is I want to hide this for a second and hide this so I can actually see my file on the desktop. I'm going to right click this and show package contents. And I'll fix that issue with that file. Here are my files here. Now, if I hold down the Option or Alt key, I can copy this over here. And now I just need to make sure that that's going to get updated in Xcode. So in fact, I want to change this to my project, Apple Pie 2.0. This is my content view file. So what I did here was I just updated the location over in this inspector. This is called the inspector pane. And there are lots of different options depending what file you have selected. Now I've changed it so that it's in my Apple Pie 2.0 project. I can hide that one again, and then let's just see if we can get Xcode to build that and show it in the preview. So now I have almost exactly the same experience that I had on the iPad. I've got a little bit more control over here, so I can use these controls to zoom out. I can also take advantage of this menu here to see what it would look like on a phone. I can change the orientation. I can change to light and dark appearance. And I can also change to see how this is going to look when people change their accessibility settings. This saves me so much time. Rather than having to run out and buy all these devices, which would be great, I can go check out all of these different variations from the comfort of Xcode. So this might be another reason why you move from... Now for this functionality, you don't have to upgrade to an Xcode project file format. You don't get quite all of this. You do get the device picker, so you can choose different devices. You don't quite get all the same controls where you can change it to landscape or portrait and interact with it. So it's a little bit more limited in the swiftpm file format, but you still get quite a long way with this more advanced tool, this professional integrated development environment that professional developers use all the time to create their apps. So hopefully that gives you an idea about some of the steps you need to take, why you need to take some of those steps, why you would want to move from Swift Playgrounds when maybe that's a much more comfortable device to go off and use on the plane and work on your code. I do this all the time, syncing between my iPad apps and playgrounds that I have on there just to work on certain code pieces of apps that I have on the App Store in Xcode project file format. Because it's a great way to keep working on things on the go, maybe while inspiration strikes. And then when I need to take advantage of the debugger tools to really figure out those last few steps before we ship and make sure that everything is locked down and our users are going to get really good experiences, I usually pop over to Xcode just because it gives me the tools that I'm familiar with and that can really help us along the way. So I hope that's helped, and hopefully we'll see some of your apps on the store soon.